During the final hours of the Horus heresy, as the forces of the traitor legions laid siege to the Imperial Palace upon Terra, the Emperor would be forced to undertake one final desperate gambit in order to achieve victory against the armies of the traitorous Warmaster, Horus Lupercal. Sensing that Horus had lowered the shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor, along with the Primarchs Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, and a handful of warriors drawn from the ranks of the Custodes, Astartes, and Imperial Army would teleport aboard the Warmaster's ship in hopes of cutting the head off of the proverbial snake. However, something would go awry during the teleportation process, scattering the Emperor's forces throughout the bowels of the Vengeful Spirit. Undaunted, the Emperor would battle his way through hordes of heretic Astartes and demonic creatures as he fought his way towards the bridge, where he knew that Horus would be waiting for him. Upon reaching the bridge, the Emperor would discover that Sanguinius had located the traitor first, and had ultimately died at his hand. The Emperor and Horus would then engage one another in a titanic duel to determine the very fate of humanity, landing blow after blow upon one another within both the material and immaterial realms. Despite his near godlike power, the Emperor was unable to gain an advantage over his wayward son due to not only the fact that Horus had his own impressive abilities augmented by the Chaos Gods, but also as a result of the Emperor's own hesitation and self-doubt holding him back, unwilling to unleash his full power against the man who was once his most trusted and beloved son. This would allow Horus to utterly dominate his father during their battle, with the Warmaster even managing to cripple and mortally wound the Master of Mankind. At that moment, a lone figure would enter the bridge and, without hesitation, come to the Emperor's defense, launching himself at the corrupted Primarch. Despite the courageous and selfless actions of this warrior, Horus, laughing maniacally all the while, would unleash a blast of pure warp energy against this would-be hero, reducing their body to little more than a charred skeleton. Realizing that his son was well and truly lost to him, the Emperor, no longer holding himself back, would focus his powers into a beam of concentrated psychic energy which lanced directly through Horus's heart, inflicting not only a devastating wound upon the Warmaster's body, but even managing to temporarily expunge the taint of chaos from his very soul. Now having been freed from the corrupting influence of the Chaos Gods, sanity would finally return to the Warmaster who, upon realizing the extent of his various atrocities, begged for his father to kill him. The Emperor would initially hesitate, but upon coming to the realization that the Chaos Gods could once again assert their dominance over the Warmaster at any moment, the Emperor knew that he had no choice but to acquiesce. Forcing all feelings of love and compassion from his very soul and psyche, the Emperor, unleashing the full extent of his powers, would destroy his son's body, possibly even his very soul, before collapsing into unconsciousness. Shortly after the Warmaster's death, Rogel Dawn would finally reach the bridge, only to find the mutilated and broken form of his father as it lay beside the lifeless body of his brother. Upon discovering that the Emperor still lived, albeit barely, Dawn would return his father to Terra, having been instructed to inter his dying body into the Golden Throne, the mechanisms of which having been extensively modified in order to act as a life support system. From this day forth, the Emperor would remain seated upon the Golden Throne, using his near godlike powers to harness its rampant, nigh uncontrollable energies as his physical body slowly degraded and degenerated into little more than a skeletal husk, before eventually lapsing into a silence that would remain mostly undisturbed for the next 10,000 years. It is also worth mentioning at this time that the Emperor was noted to be a type of entity known as a Perpetual, beings capable of regenerating from the most grievous of wounds and even resurrecting themselves from death, making them, for all intents and purposes, biologically immortal. But if the Emperor is indeed a Perpetual, then one important question needs to be asked. Why does the Emperor simply not allow himself to die in order to regenerate his body and restore himself to glory? Such an idea would appear to depend upon whether or not the Emperor himself still retains any trace of his perpetual abilities. As mentioned earlier, during his battle against Horus, a lone warrior would rush to the Emperor's aid before being slain by the War Master. The exact identity of this warrior remains somewhat unclear due to multiple contradicting sources. While some sources have claimed that this warrior was one of the Emperor's own custodian guard or a Space Marine Terminator, others would go on to state that the man who stood in defense of the Emperor was a soldier of the Imperial Army named Alanius Pius. During the course of the Horus heresy, there were at least 2 individuals to have borne such a name: a mortal soldier named Alanius Pius, who died during the Siege of Terra at the hands of the demon primarch Angron, and a Perpetual known as Pius Alanius Person, who himself had fought at the Emperor's side during Terra's distant past. If Alanius Pius, the Perpetual, had been the man to come to the Emperor's aid upon the vengeful spirit, then since it would appear that Horus had indeed managed to permanently kill him, it's entirely possible that the Emperor could have, for lack of a better term, had the Perpetuality beaten from his body. After all, it's worth remembering that Horus's own powers were greatly augmented by the Chaos Gods, rendering him more or less on par with the Emperor in terms of sheer psychic potency. It is also important to note that one of the few ways to permanently kill a Perpetual is with an element known as Fulgurite, which in itself was created as a byproduct of the Emperor's own immense power. Because Horus's own powers had been boosted to a level that was effectively equal to that of the Emperor, it's entirely reasonable to assume that the War Master could have also gained the ability to permanently kill Perpetuals, or at the very least drain them of their Perpetual traits. If the Emperor had indeed lost his Perpetuality, then this would certainly provide an explanation for the Emperor's now cadaverous appearance, as he would no longer be able to regenerate from his injuries, resulting in his body gradually rotting away, despite the best efforts of the various life support systems tasked with sustaining his physical form. But if the Emperor did indeed manage to retain his Perpetual traits following his duel with Horus, then it's entirely possible that the Master of Mankind is in fact trapped within a continuous cycle of death and resurrection. The reason for this particular possibility is due in part to the purpose and energies exuded by the Golden Throne itself. During the later years of the Great Crusade, Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns Legion, after learning that Horus had intended to rebel against the Emperor, would use his incredible psychic powers to generate an astral projection with which to warn his father. However, as a result of Magnus's haste and naivete, which would see him inadvertently make a bargain with the Chaos God Tzeentch, the Primarch would cause irreparable damage to the Emperor's secret webway project, creating a warp tear and allowing demons to begin besieging the Terran webway gate. As a result of the Primarch's disastrous yet well-intended actions, which would come to be known by some as the Folly of Magnus, the Emperor would be forced to spend the majority of the Horus heresy upon the Golden Throne, desperately attempting to harness its energies and in turn preventing the warp tear created by Magnus from enveloping Terra completely. The very act of utilizing the Golden Throne for this purpose was known to be an utterly agonizing process, both physically and mentally, as detailed with the following passage from the novel Master of Mankind.
She would have preferred the majestic ignorance, better to feel everything and see almost nothing rather than stare upon the naked truth. The enthroned Emperor was just a man in pain, his suffering etched plain, his mouth open in a silent scream. The agonies he endured for the sake of the species had wrought lines upon his features, somehow bringing the passage of time to an ageless face. Occasionally, the tortured features would twitch in a quiet snarl, his fingers would spasm. A golden boot might gently thud against the metal throne. At first, Kara had hoped such tics heralded the Emperor's reawakening. Now she knew better.
Because of the fact that the Emperor was continuously subjected to intense and incomprehensible pain, it's entirely possible that the energies of the Golden Throne could ultimately cause the Master of Mankind to perish, only for him to regenerate in order for the cycle to begin all over again. After all, when the Emperor briefly left the confines of the Golden Throne to face Horus in battle, Malkador the Sigillite, the second most powerful cycle within the entire Imperium of Man, was left to operate the Golden Throne in the Emperor's stead, only for its energies to prove too great for the Sigillite to handle, resulting in his death. While Malkador was not as powerful or as resilient as the Emperor from either a psychic or physical standpoint, with the latter being the result of his advanced age, it is still nonetheless a distinct possibility that if the energies of the Golden Throne could so easily slay Malkador, they could very well prove fatal for the Emperor as well. Even the warriors of the Companions, those members of the Custodes who are permitted to stand within the very presence of the Emperor himself, will have their armor gradually scorched black due to their close proximity to both their master and the Golden Throne, as shown with the following passage from the novel Watchers of the Throne, The Emperor's Legion.
Eventually we came to the heart of it. Companions were waiting for us, 12 of them. The gold of their auramite was blackened, as if charred by fire. I had heard that proximity to the source did that, turning our pride into ashes. I had always thought the symbolism appropriate.
While it remains somewhat ambiguous as to whether the aforementioned source which blackens the armor of custodians is a result of the Golden Throne, or simply due to the Emperor's own phenomenal psychic powers, if it is indeed the former, and that the energies of the Golden Throne are capable of scorching auramite, which in itself is an incredibly durable and resilient material, then it could very well indeed cause immense physical damage to the Emperor's body, even to the point where such trauma would be repeatedly fatal. As such, the Emperor could very well be stuck in a perpetual loop of death and resurrection, destined to spend his immortality in a state of unending agony as he desperately attempts to correct the mistake that his son Magnus made over 10,000 years ago, and in turn preventing him from ever leaving the confines of the Sanctum Imperialis, leaving his body trapped within the confines of what is essentially a gilded and torturous cage. However, following the creation of the colossal warp rift known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, some claim that the Emperor is beginning to grow steadily more powerful, and not only that, but is preparing to finally step down from the Golden Throne in order to lead mankind once more. If this were indeed the case, then all we can do is wait. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.